Hi everybody, this is Anne. The visual components of any work of art include the same 7 design elements: color, form, line, shape, space, texture, and value, each of which play an important role in the success or failure of any design and should be carefully considered. In this video, I'll demonstrate 3 platter designs concentrating specifically on the role of one specific element, line. First, I'll demonstrate how to use border lines to create focal points. Starting with a bone-dry oval platter, I'll use a commercial stencil and grape leaves for this design. To keep the colors from being too busy, I'm starting with 2 analogous colors on the color wheel, turquoise and baby blue, plus the black for the border lines. My stencil is a bit beat up and doesn't stick to the clay surface anymore, but I can still trace around the openings to achieve the design. I just hold it in place and lightly trace. I picked off some of the various sized grape leaves and staggered them along the plate. I traced around each one. This leaves me with a confusing mess of overlapping lines to untangle. I took one of the colors and began to fill in all the stencil shapes around the grape leaves. I'm using a fingernail detailer brush for this, as I find the pointy end can get into the tight corners better. You can see that all the areas outside the grape leaves are colored, while I didn't touch the areas inside the leaves. Using the other color, I painted solid coats to fill the inside of each leaf. I can start to see the pattern, but it's still flat and confusing, and there's no focal point. My goal is to differentiate the grape leaves from the background and bring them to the foreground. To do this, I'll try adding black border lines around just the grape leaves and see what happens. Again, I'm using my pointy fingernail detailer brush, which is like using a pen for sharp, thin lines. To make these pop more, I'll connect them with stems. Finally, I'll give the leaves one more distinctive feature by adding sgraffito lines for veins, following the vein lines from one of the real leaves. Remember to wear a dust mask and gently sweep away the clay crumbs to avoid breathing the dust particles. The border lines really separate the grape leaves from the background. Visually, it looks like the leaves are floating over top of the stenciled areas. Here's one that I did earlier, reversing the colors with the turquoise on the leaves and the blue in the background, but the border lines still work even then. I bisque fired this to cone 04. I coated it with clear glaze and fired it to cone 5 with a 6-minute hold for this look. It's amazing how just the addition of such thin lines can make a powerful visual statement. For this design, I'm starting with a leather hard fish platter. If you'd like to see the video on how to make this, check out the link above. I used a flexible ruler to section off the fish's back from his belly, about 3/4 across the plate. I thought it'd be fun to mask off some white areas along the plate to look like water bubbles. I dipped each of the paper circles in water and stuck it down. I used 3 solid coats of turquoise blue and coated the larger side of the fish. When the underglaze had lost its sheen, I peeled up the paper for some nice crisp-edged bubbles. Gently with a pencil, I traced my first curly line around and down to the tail end. I traced more lines around that one. I continued drawing wavy line patterns on top of the painted area, always drawing parallel but not crossing over the other lines. Using a thin ball tool, I sgraffitoed each of the pencil lines through the underglaze. Again, don't forget to wear the dust mask and don't blow the dust into the air. I always discard my clay crumbs into my container of water. You can leave the bubbles without any color, or you can fill in each sgraffito line with a darker color like this. I like the wavy lines, but they blend into the background, so I'll use border lines to group the sets of lines together and define them. The border lines force your eye to see those separate lines grouped into units of wavy line patterns like water across the fish. The definition from the borders creates visual gaps between each unit, ultimately creating pathways for your eye to move across the plate. Now here's one I created earlier, where I created a much simpler crisscross design on the belly of the fish so as not to compete with the more complicated pattern above it. I also added thick white slip over top of the bubble designs to add a little more depth and dimension to the design. Again, I glazed it with a shiny clear on the blue side and a satin white around the crisscross lines on the other side. Here's another variation of the plate where I just left the bubbles without any color, but glazed and fired it in the same way. Finally, I thought I'd show you that border lines don't always have to be a thin black line. I started with a bone-dry rectangular platter. I cut out 10 hexagonal-shaped pieces of paper which fit down one side of my platter, which will act as masks for my next step. Now here's the paper that I measured out, drew, and cut my hexagon shapes from. I lightly traced around the hexagonal holes, using it as a guide to how to place my hexagons. I dipped each one in water and stuck them down on the plate. I also wet another piece of paper over the other side of the plate to mask it off. I'll be using this atomizer for the next step. I filled it with thin underglaze about the consistency of buttermilk. I took the platter outside for ventilation, then began spraying the yellow onto the platter over the paper masks. I emptied out the yellow and filled the atomizer with Amico Bright Red. This time I began spraying mostly along the corners of the platter and a little in the center. When the underglaze had lost its shine, I removed the paper masks. Notice how the underglaze created sharp, distinctive edges around the masked hexagons. The hexagons looked empty, so I drew a simple bee line design to trace into each one for a visual pop. I thought it'd be fun to draw even bigger bees for the blank side of the platter, so I came up with this half bee design. I turned over the drawing and blacked the back with graphite. I placed the bee at the bottom of the platter and traced it. I continued with the same design at the top and then the middle section. I did the same thing for the line designs in my hexagons. Using the Amico Intense Yellow, I filled in every other section on the bee's body, alternating it with the black. I then painted some of the baby blue into the pockets of the design on the bee wings. Note how the stripes become larger, thick border lines for separation and definition. To define the areas on the wings and body, I use the thin black border lines like in the first project. Another alternative to solid lines is the broken line. These types of lines add variety and give the piece character. I always think they look like sewing or quilting lines. Now here's a platter I painted earlier where I not only added the broken lines in the hexagons, but I echoed those lines behind the bigger bees by painting a curly bee trail. I also added a wider swath of red as a borderline along the platter's side. Again, I glazed the platter with clear glaze and fired it to cone 5 with a 6-minute hold. I can see this platter being used in the springtime with a fresh batch of warm cookies on it. I hope you have a new understanding of how to use the art element line. It can really play an essential part into your pottery decorating. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks button or the link to buy me a coffee. It also really helps us out if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time in the studio.